Welcome to this worship experience, a collaboration hosted by Jenn Swanson, Linnea Shields, Leslie Fairley, and myself, Jan Beal, ministers of Inlet, Golden Ears, and Como Lake United Churches. As we gather for worship, we acknowledge that the land on which our churches and communities are built is the unceded land of the Coast Salish people, including the Katzie, the Kwantlen, the Coquitlam, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Stolo First Nations. May we work to learn and build and deepen right relationship of thanksgiving and hope now and into the future. May God bless all with love. Well, we are delighted that you took time to nurture your spirit in worship today. So whether you're from near or far, from one of the hosting faith communities or somewhere across the land or no faith community at all, you are welcome here. And we are so glad that you are participating in this online experience. If you're joining in on Sunday morning, please feel free to connect on the YouTube chat and let us know where you're from, and put in a prayer request if you so desire. And after worship, each of our faith communities hosts a Zoom coffee hour, and you're welcome to any one of those. The links to those will be in the YouTube chat toward the end of the service. Now, let's take a moment. Take a moment to breathe, to settle, and to remember that we gather in God's presence. And let's allow this candle, this light, to remind us that we gather in the powerful light and love of Christ, in whom we live and move and have our being. Thanks be to God.
We're each created in God's image, each one of us carrying God's likeness, but each one of us God's unique creation. And just as we are unique and different from each other, there are many different ways in which we come to know God, and different ways that we as human beings connect with God, with Jesus, with the Spirit in worship. Over the past weeks, we've taken advantage of the creativity and flexibility of this online medium to offer a taste of different flavors of worship. So far, we've had a taste of the worship styles of jazz vespers, of forest church, a contemplative service, and last week, a taste of praise. That's a lot of different flavors. To continue the metaphor, I hope it hasn't given you indigestion. Now, some of these flavors may be new and some may be familiar. Some may resonate more than others. We hope that in the smorgasbord of these spiritual flavors, that you have found food for your souls. Psalm 34 has a verse that goes, "Taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy are those who take refuge in God." Taste and see. So, what's cooking today? In describing today's flavor, I feel like we need to be sitting around a campfire. It's dark, but the flickering of the firelight is drawing us in, drawing us closer. Everything outside the circle of light melts away, and we're held in this liminal space and time. And that's when the storytelling begins. That's today's flavor, a taste of storytelling. There's something primal about storytelling, about oral storytelling. For generations and generations before any of the stories from our scriptures were written down, they were shared by being passed orally, one generation to the next, the storyteller being the one who memorized the words of the stories by heart. We who have come to know God through these ancient words, we've been called people of the book. But before we were that, We were people of the spoken word, people of the story. In the scriptures, there are so many references to God speaking. God spoke creation into being at the very beginning. God spoke to the patriarchs and matriarchs. God spoke through the prophets. And in Jesus and through Jesus, God continues to speak to us today. So this morning, as we worship together while apart, let's open our hearts to listen for God speaking to us through the ancient words that you will hear come to life in the words of some very gifted storytellers. And let's acknowledge that God is also not just speaking, but also listening and deeply connecting with our stories as we pray. And then as we sing, let's listen for God in the familiar words of the hymns, yet another way to tell the stories. The opening hymn tells the story of church community at its finest, a church community that reflects God's warm embrace like a mother, a church that is welcoming and accepting, that is with us in good times and in bad times, a church that is inviting us to come in and sit down. Let's worship.
Come in and sit down. You are a part of the family. We are lost and we are found, and we are a part of the family. You know the reason why you came, yet no reason can explain. So share in the laughter and cry in the pain, for we are a part of the family. Come in and sit down. You are a part of the family. We are lost and we are found, and we are a part of the family. God is with us in this place, like a mother's warm embrace. We're all forgiven by God's grace, for we are a part of the family. Come in and sit down. You are a part of the family. We are lost and we are found, and we are a part of the family. There's life to be shared in the bread and the wine. We are the branches, Christ is the vine. This is God's temple, it's not yours or mine, but we are a part of the family. Come in and sit down. You are a part of the family. We are lost and we are found, and we are a part of the family. There's rest for the weary and health for us all. There's a yoke that is easy and a burden that's small. So come in and worship and answer the call, for we are a part of the family. Come in and sit down. You are a part of the family. We are lost and we are found, and we are a part of the family.
Story is central to our Christian faith, and the stories we now read from the Bible actually originated as oral tradition. They were told around the fire, at the dinner table, at public worship. And today, our guest is Reverend Dr. Tom Boomershine from Dayton, Ohio. More than 4 decades ago, Tom was lit up by the power and joy of biblical storytelling, and he began reviving this art in his own life and beyond. So welcome, Tom. We're really glad that you could take time to be with us today. Could you comment, please, on what are the gifts of biblical storytelling and what is so important and engaging about it?
Right. Well, the gifts of biblical storytelling. I imagine on the one hand, there are the gifts for the teller. Learning these stories and telling them is, I don't know, it's a kind of adventure. And getting them inside is a great gift because you have the stories for telling at any time. I became aware of that myself, of that great gift when I got hit by a car and I was in cast for 6 months and out of work for a year when I was 34. In fact, it was just a couple of years before I founded the network, because what I was that the stories that I knew by heart were the one thing that I could remember. I couldn't stay awake because of the pain medication, so I couldn't read without falling asleep. And so the stories that I told myself that I remembered from my work on my dissertation, which was on Mark as a storyteller, I found those stories to be a great source of comfort, energy, forgiveness when I would not do my exercises, which I needed to do in order to walk again. And so it was, on the one hand, a great gift for me. And the formation of my memory, of a whole skill that is a major part of my life. But I'm also aware of the gift of the stories for people who are hearing them. So the gift of storytelling is engagement and involvement and participation. It's also fun. There's a dynamic of biblical storytelling that is different than anything I've ever experienced. It's, on the one hand, profound. It's a source of connection with God, but it is also a gift for others. And so it's it's a great thing. It's amazing how much impact it's had over the centuries, and how the impact that it is having now around the world.
Tell me the stories of Jesus, I love to hear. Things I would ask him to tell me if he were here. Scenes by the wayside, tales of the sea, stories of Jesus, tell them to me. First let me hear how the children stood round his knee, and I shall fancy his blessing resting on me. Words full of kindness, deeds full of grace, all in the love light of Jesus' face. Tell me in accents of wonder how rolled the sea, tossing the boat in a tempest on Galilee, and how the Master, ready and kind, chided the billows and hushed the wind. Into the city I'd follow, I would sing loudest hosannas. Jesus is King. Show me that scene in the garden of bitter pain, and of the cross where my Savior for me was slain. Sad ones or bright ones, so that they be stories of Jesus, tell them to me.
So Jacob left Beersheba and he headed toward Haran, but he came to a certain place and he spent the night there because the sun had gone down. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and he lay down in that place. And he dreamed. He dreamed there was a ladder set up on the earth, reaching up into heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Then Jacob woke up. He said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't even know it." Then he was afraid. He said, "How awesome is this place? It is none other than the house of God, and this is the gateway of heaven." Then the Lord stood beside him and said, "I am Yahweh, the God of your father Abraham and of Isaac. The land on which you are lying I will give to you and to your offspring, and your offspring will be like the dust of the earth. They will spread abroad to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south, and all families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you." So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar, and he poured oil on it, and he called it Beth-el, the place of God, although it was called Luz at first. And then Jacob made a vow. He said, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I can go back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up for a pillar here, this will be the house of God. And of all that you give me, I will surely give you 1/10."
The wonderful thing about storybooks is that they're not just for children. Today's story is Wangari's Trees of Peace, a true story from Africa by Jeanette Winter. The earth was naked. For me, the mission was try to cover it with green. Wangari. Wangari lives under an umbrella of green trees in the shadow of Mount Kenya in Africa. She watches the birds in the forest where she and her mother go to gather firewood for cooking. As she helps harvest the sweet potatoes, sugarcane, and maize from the rich soil. Wangari shines in school, and when she grows tall like the trees in the forest, she wins a scholarship to study in America. 6 years later, when her studies are over, Wangari returns to Kenya, in her home, and she sees a change. What has happened, she wonders. Where are the trees? Wangari sees women bent from hauling firewood miles and miles from home. She sees barren land where no crops grow. And where are the birds, she wonders. Thousands of trees have been cut down to make room for buildings, but no one planted new trees to take their place. Will all of Kenya become a desert, she wonders, as her tears fall. Wangari thinks about the barren land. I begin to replace some of the lost trees here in my own backyard, one tree at a time. She starts planting 9 seedlings. Watching the seedlings take root gives Wangari an idea to plant more, to start a farm for baby trees, a nursery. In an open space, she plants row after row of tiny trees. Next, Wangari convinces the village women that planting trees is a good thing. She gives each one a seedling. Our lives will be better when we have trees again. You'll see. We are planting the seeds of hope. The women spread out over their village, planting tiny trees in long rows, like a green belt stretching over the land. The government men laugh. Women can't do this, they say. It takes trained foresters to plant trees. The women ignore their laughter and keep planting. Wangari pays them a small amount for each seedling still living after 3 months. Their first earnings ever. And word travels like wind rustling through leaves about the green returning to Wangari's village. And soon other women in other villages and towns and cities in Kenya are planting long rows of seedlings too. But the cutting continues. Wangari stands tall as an oak to protect the old trees still remaining. We need a park more than we need an office building. The government men disagree, and Wangari blocks their way, so they hit her with their clubs. They call her a troublemaker and put her in jail. And still she stands tall. Right is right, even if you're alone. But Wangari is not alone. Talk of the trees spread all over Africa like ripples in Lake Victoria. More women hear the talk and plant even more seedlings in longer and longer rows. The seedlings take root and grow tall until there are over 30 million trees where there used to be none. The umbrella of green in Kenya returns. Women walk tall, their backs straight, for now they can gather firewood closer to home. The land is no longer barren. Sweet potatoes, sugarcane, and maize grow again in the rich red earth. The whole world hears of Wangari's trees and of her army of women who planted them. And if you were to climb to the very top of Mount Kenya today, you would see the millions of trees growing below you and the green that Wangari brought back to Africa.
He put before them another parable. He said, "The kingdom of God may be compared to somebody who sowed good seed in their field. And then while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat. And then they went away. So that when the plants came up and bore grain, the weeds appeared as well. So the slaves of the householder, they said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He said, "An enemy has done this." They asked him, "Would you like us to gather them up?" He said, No, because in gathering them up, then you would uproot the wheat as well. No, we'll wait to the harvest, and when the harvest comes, I will tell the reapers, collect up the wheat and bind it into bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat and put it in my barn." So he left the crowds and he went back in the house, but the disciples followed him and they approached him. They said, "Explain to us this parable of the weeds in the field." He said, "The one who sows the good seed is the human one. And the field, well, that's the world. And the good seed, that's the children of the kingdom. And the weeds, that is the children of the evil one. And the enemy is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the angels, they are the reapers." So just as the weeds are collected up and they are burnt with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The human one will send his angels out into his kingdom, and they will collect out of the kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And the children of the righteous, they will shine like the sun in the kingdom of the Father. Let anyone who has ears hear.
I was minding my own business, working on my laptop here in my kitchen one day, when the phone rang, and a man with a heavy accent who claimed he was from Microsoft said there was a problem with my computer and that it was dire and that he was calling to help. Now, usually when this happens, I hang up, but this time I got mad and I got judgy. And I said, "Oh, really? And how exactly do you know that?" I asked. And he started talking about my PC, which I don't actually have. So I let him ramble on a bit, and then I decided to let him have it. I said, "You are a horrible person." And there was dead silence on the end of the phone. And then I said, "How dare you do such awful things to people by lying and by making up stories to swindle them out of their hard-earned money?" I paused, and he very weakly said, But ma'am, I'm from Microsoft." And I said, "No, you're not. You are not. You are preying on people who believe that you are trying to help them get rid of a virus in their computer when in fact you're trying to steal their money. What you are doing is terrible. How can you sleep at night? What would your mother say? You should be ashamed of yourself." And then I hung up. And after I took a deep breath, I felt very sanctimonious and satisfied that I had taught that scam artist a lesson, which is unlikely. But it made me feel good to think of him as a noxious weed in the great garden of life. And then I thought, Wow, that was pretty unchristian of me. How do I know? How do I know that he's a really terrible person? Maybe he was just a person who had to make a really terrible decision, a terrible choice. Maybe it was a case of life and death. Maybe this was the only job that he could get in some awful factory call center somewhere. Maybe he lived in a situation where there was a lot of violence, where there was poverty, where there was hardship. And maybe this was the only kind of work he could get to feed his family, to call faceless strangers in another country that he would never meet and pretend to help them with a computer virus while duping them out of some money they have. Maybe he didn't know that's what he was actually doing. Maybe he was told that the people he was calling were rich and wouldn't miss it. We just don't know. Maybe he was facing a difficult choice of having to do something nefarious and illegal, or not being able to eat or provide shelter for himself or for his loved ones. Maybe he was paying back a debt. Maybe he was an indentured slave under some kind of modern slavery system. Maybe this work was the lesser of two evils. Maybe I should have just hung up. The human condition is complex. We tend to want to classify and categorize everything into good or evil, saints and sinners, good soil and thorny or rocky soil, weeds and wheat. And what's fascinating about this text is that it seems to be saying something else under the surface of it. It seems to be saying, let them be, because they exist, both the wheat and the weeds. And just wait and see. It seems that we are not called to weed this particular garden. But let's go back for a minute. I want to talk about three things before we get more into the text. The first being what a parable even is. Our theme today is storytelling, and Jesus used this ancient technique of using parables to teach and explain things quite a bit. And parables are not what they first seem to be. They are, as the Godly Play folks say, not easy to open. In Godly Play, they are explained as being like gold-painted boxes that are hard to open up. They're not easy to open up, but once you do, there is a surprise, something wonderful inside. Parables look innocent enough on the surface. They look like nice little sweet stories, but they usually contain a twist or a pithy saying at the end, or a deeper meaning, kind of like when you peel back the layers of an onion. And not all understand them on first hearing. Let those with ears hear. So parables are nifty little stories that actually have more going on than they seem to on the surface. That's the first thing. The second thing to know is that it is quite likely that the second part of the text we heard this morning, the explanation part, verses 36 to 43, was a part that was added later by the writer of Matthew in order to specifically address his own church community. This is what many scholars think, because this part of the text is so very different than the first part and then any other of the teachings of Jesus. It actually goes against what Jesus usually says, which is why scholars are suspicious that this might have been a later addition. In a sermon preached by the Reverend Dr. Alan Brown, he says that the community that Matthew was writing for was probably struggling with the fact that though they were Jewish, they had been thrown out of their synagogues, because now they're following Christ, right? So Dr. Bram is saying that now they were probably feeling displaced and struggling to justify themselves in the face of rejection. And so he continues by saying, it would seem that in the hands of Matthew's church, the story turned into a means of supporting an us against them mentality. They are the wheat that will one day be harvested and gathered into God's barns, while their enemies are the weeds that will one day be gathered up and burned. It's a strange addition to the text. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says that God gives the blessing of the sun and the rain to all. That's in Matthew 5, verses 44 and 45. But here, however, he tells the parable about separating the children of the kingdom from the children of the evil one. And when you look at what Jesus says elsewhere, this parable about us and them stands out like a sore thumb. It's quite hard to reconcile with everything else, which is why the scholars are suspicious. So that was the second thing. The third thing to know that may or may not be relevant, but I think is interesting, is about the weeds in this text. The weeds that are referred to are a very prolific weed found all over Israel called darnel ryegrass. Sometimes it's called cockle. And these are sneaky, nasty weeds. And kind of like my telephone scam artist, they pretend. So in some places they're called false weed. They're sneaky because for most of the growing season, they look exactly like wheat. You can't tell them apart. So much so that the only way to tell is when finally the top part blooms, when the wheat bud, I guess, actually blooms. Wheat is heavy and it will flop over, whereas the false wheat or the darnel ryegrass will stand straight up. And so the only way you can tell is at the very end, right before you harvest it, which ones are wheat and which ones are weed. And did I say that darnel ryegrass happens to be poisonous? In some instances, if you ingest it, it is fatal. So it is nasty. Talk about evil, right? But another thing that's interesting about the whole thing is that sabotaging of wheat fields in first century Middle East was not unheard of. In fact, there was a Roman law against doing it. So people used to do that. They used to run around and throw these weeds into people's wheat fields. And if you tried to pull out, you wouldn't know that you were sabotaged until the plants grew and bore fruit. And by then, if you tried to yank out the weeds, you would yank out everything, including your wheat, because the roots would be all intertwined and the whole thing would come apart and would be ruined if you ripped them out before they were finished flowering and before they were ready. So we have this parable, the top part of that text, told by Jesus. And then we have a writer addressing a specific situation in a new community of Christ followers who then re-explains the Jesus parable with his own spin on it, we think. And then we have poisonous evil weeds growing in the wheat. What a story in a small amount of text. So what do we do with this? What might this strange text say to us today? Well, as humans, we often want to put ourselves automatically on the side of the good guys. You know, the way I was being all sanctimonious with my phone call. It's human nature. And when we read the parables of Jesus, we often do the same thing. Who here immediately plunked themselves last week when we talked about the parable of the sower into the good soil? Right? Or this week, if we're dividing ourselves into the wheat and the weeds, who envisions themselves as the wheat rather than the poisonous, noxious weed? We do that, and we pretty much always think we are right? Have you been reading comments lately on social media feeds or underneath articles, news articles? Have you been tempted to weigh in with your own opinion? Maybe you have already. Have you quickly figured out how nasty people can be in those comments when they are faceless and they are just writing, right? Have you tweeted or written a letter to the editor? Maybe you've just screamed at your television or your radio. I have very often wanted to do that and have somehow held back most of the time. The polarity and the judgment and the opinion sharing and the positioning is rampant, isn't it? And we naturally tend to see ourselves on the side of good versus evil, no matter what side we think or believe is right. I do it. I'm sure you do it. We are complex creatures, and we are trying to live meaningful existences in a challenging world. And even when you are saying something or writing something that you are sure is good and decent and that no one could possibly disagree with, someone out there is going to. Or they're going to judge it, or they're going to take it the wrong way and say something. As Taylor Swift says in her song, haters gonna hate. But maybe we don't know the whole story. And so rather than rip out the weeds with the wheat and ruin everything, maybe we should take a breath. Maybe we should wait. What might have actually been going on for that telephone scam guy, right? Because I don't know the whole story. It's very, very hard for us to know the whole story of what's going on in someone else's world, what struggles they are having, what experiences have led them to how they think or how they see the world, what they have to do in order to survive or in order to find meaning or purpose or make sense of what's happening. We don't know. The thing is, in this parable, we are not called to judge. We are not called to weed that garden. We are, in fact, called to wait and see what blooms. And interestingly, the weeds in this text actually don't destroy the wheat in the end. The wheat is gathered up at the end just as it would have been before. The weeds are allowed to grow, and then the wheat and the weeds are separated. We, as children of the kingdom, are invited to bear fruit, to do our own growing and to flourish and to bear fruit, to follow the teachings of Jesus and to do our best in the field, in the garden, and to bloom and to grow as we can. Now, that doesn't mean we don't stand up for injustice. Rather, the opposite. Jesus' whole ministry was about inclusion and healing and justice and care of those who need it most by all of us. That's how we make the kingdom here on earth. We are all kin together, everyone on the planet. We have to look after each other, and we have to look after the planet. We are always called to action in that regard. But do we need to spend so much time wrestling in the weeds? It might not accomplish what we think it might. We might, with all our arguing and fighting and judging and polarizing, just rip each other apart and ruin the whole thing. Plus, it takes a lot of energy. Being patient and focusing on our own growth and waiting to bloom and bear fruit is not the same as doing nothing. So how do we resist the temptation to take matters into our own hand and weed the garden, or yell at the person on the phone, or honk our horn, or write that terrible thing underneath a comment on a screen? How do we resist the temptation to weed that garden? How do we do that? What can we do to fertilize and nourish and promote well-being and the flourishing of the wheat in our own lives and in the lives of those with whom we share community? And what can we do to help others around us who we can see need our help? What can we do for them? How can we do that? And how can we deal with our own inner weeds that are growing and festering and intertwining? So that, as that old cross-stitch tea towel in the kitchen says, we can then bloom where we are planted. How can we increase our compassion and our kindness and our care of others so that the planet survives, so that we can all flourish? How can we do that? And what grace do you need to ask God for today in order to let the weeds be? In order to not take on the weeding of this garden, in order for you to take Jesus by the hand and find the peace and the space in which to grow in faith, in love, and in kindness in the world. What grace do you need? may that grace be yours. Amen.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. When the darkness appears and the night draws near and the day is past and gone, at the river I stand, guide my feet, won't you hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows dim, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand, lest I fall, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Precious Lord, I love your name. When I look back from whence I came, sometimes stumbling, sometimes falling, sometimes alone. But through the storm, through the night, you're my guide and you're my life. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me home. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home.
Holy One, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, Light of healing, Presence of courage, Source of wisdom and discernment. In these times of uncertainty, fear, loss, and discouragement, may we be rooted in your love, filled with your peace, and illumined by your grace and forgiveness. Kindle our hearts to quiet strength and restore our spirits. You are our shelter and strength. We pray especially today for our families and communities, for friends near and far, for those who face grief and loss, those who struggle with fear, those who are lonely, for those stretched by the needs of loved ones, and for life's immense challenges and changes at home, at work, and in our communities. Jesus, source of love, breathe on us your peace once again. Give us ears to hear your message and open hearts to follow your guidance. Teach us to deepen our faith and trust in the one you called Abba. And in this week's life journey, help us to be aware of life blessings, life blessing moments, words that strengthen and love that heals. In the light of Jesus, Amen.
On behalf of Golden Ears, Inlet, and Como Lake United Churches, we want to take a little time to say thank you. Thank you to each one of you for all of the different ways that you have continued to support your churches during this very difficult time. There's lots of ways that you have been generous, both with your tithes and offerings and with your time. We know that there are people who spend time every day calling each other, checking in, taking care of each other. There are others who are knitting prayer shawls. There are yet others who are doing incredible ministries with healing and with food. If you're wondering how you can financially support your church in the absence of an offering plate being passed around, there are links in the description of this video that will take you to the online giving web pages of each of our 3 congregations. You can also mail in your checks or drop them off at the offices, or you could send an e-transfer. However you choose to do it, and however you choose to give your time, we thank you. And may God continue to bless the many gifts of our communities and use them to serve the world as agents of Christ's transforming love.
I, the Lord of sea and sky, I have heard my people cry, all who dwell in deepest sin, my hand will save. I who made the stars of night, I will make their darkness bright. Who will bear my light to them? Whom shall I send? Here I am, Lord. Easy tie, Lord. I have heard you calling in the night. I
I'm going to leave you with a blessing by John O'Donohue from his book, To Bless the Space Between Us, a Book of Blessings. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone my dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for, and waste my heart on fear no more. And friends, may you go into the rest of your day knowing that you are loved unconditionally by God, that the light of Christ shines within you, and that the Spirit moves you ever deeper into the rest of your life story. God bless you.